Hello, hello, and welcome to the first in the DPP series of webcasts under the Going Live and Remote strand. We're really grateful to you for being here. We think we've got a fantastic webcast for you, a load of great speakers coming up and some wonderful content. Now, it's all based on a report that we published today. That report is called Live Remote Production, and it looks into exactly what it says on the cover, producing live content remotely. I'm Rowan de Pomeray, I'm the CTO here at the DPP, and as I say, I've got 6 amazing speakers coming up to talk to you about this, but it was all enabled by some fantastic DPP member companies. So first up, I would like a huge thank you to Atos, to Ross Video, to Kisway, and to Telstra for making this work possible. Now, please do, as we go through, use the question function that's just below the video player to ask any questions. We'll mix those in as we go through. And before I introduce the first of my speakers, since we only released this report today, you might not yet have had a chance to read it. I hear that some of you actually have other things to do in your day job. So I'm just going to give you a couple of very brief extracts from the report just to set the scene for the discussion that we're going to have. Now, in this report, we identified very quickly that terminology was a key problem, that when we talk about remote production, there is no single definition of what that means. And so one of the foundational things that this report does is to define 5 production architectural models. And I would like to just share those with you now. So the 5 models that we have put together use some simplified sort of elements of production, which is the capture, that's the cameras and the microphones, the signal processing, and the control for that signal processing. And so we've put those together into these 5 simple models. The first is on location production. This is a traditional studio show or outside broadcast. Now it might, as we've got at the top here, have some remote contributors, but primarily everything is taking place at the acquisition site. Then we move on to what we're calling remote controlled production. Now, in this scenario, we've still got the signal processing at the acquisition site. So you've perhaps got an outside broadcast truck or a studio location where the processing equipment is on site, but you have some of your control remote. So some of your crew working from home or working from a separate production hub where they're controlling things. Next up, we have centralized production. Now, in this instance, we bring all of the camera feeds, all of the microphone feeds back to a central production hub where the content is processed, where the production is done and the program output is produced. And then we have distributed production. And this really starts to layer in that home working. We saw a lot of this in 2020 as people were needing to enable teams to work from home during the pandemic. So our acquisition site feeds the AV signals back to the production hub, but some or all of our production control surfaces are remote. And then the final one is cloud. So in this instance, we've moved our signal processing to the cloud. We're moving our camera feeds and our microphone feeds from the acquisition site into the cloud. And then, of course, we're remote controlling that from elsewhere, whether that's from a production hub or from home. So that's 5 production models, and I've run through those pretty quickly. So don't worry, there is an awful lot more detail on these in the report. I do encourage you to go and download it from the DPP website. And in fact, if you look down below the video player, you'll find the opportunity to download it right on the page that you're on right now as you view this, this stream. So there we go. That's enough from me. We're not here to give you all of the detail from the report. Do go and read it. Instead, we're going to discuss some of the implications of what we've heard and some real world examples from some amazing content producers and from some companies that enable them to do what they do. So I'm going to start by introducing the first of my 2 guests. We have Kevin McCue, who is Director of Technical Operations at Sky Sports, and Morwen Williams, who is Director of UK Operations at BBC News. Welcome, Kevin. Welcome, Morwen. Thank you so much for being with us. And you represent 2 really huge broadcasters that have done a lot of remote production of content. But I think perhaps when we think about remote live production, the first thing that comes to a lot of our minds is sports. So Kevin, I'm going to start with you. Sport has really perhaps been the trailblazer in this area, right? So what does remote production mean for you, and what's kind of been some of the key experiences that you've had recently?
Well, yeah, it's definitely been a busy few years in remote production, and I was going to take you through like a little bit of a whistle stop tour of what we've done over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of remote and applying remote production to our kind of higher tier rights. So we really started dipping our toe in the water. Probably 2017, 2018, when we started investigating what we were going to do with our Formula One. We used to truck a lot of equipment around the world. We used to produce in location. We used to send essentially produce feeds back to the home base, and we'd send that on to the customer from there. And we really through an opportunity of better connectivity, some bravery, and definitely a desire to become more carbon efficient with some of the productions that we were doing, we took the call to move Formula One to a remote production. So very much lots of encoded feeds, lots of latency in that one, but really these kind of fundamentally these two kind of like technical pods that move around the globe following the FOM production. And then we bring that back and we produce our Formula One content through a gallery in Osterley. And really what that did was that proved to us that remote was certainly viable, and there was a desire to continue to investigate that, and really that took us to 2019 when we started a project and completed a project to take our English Football League, so just a step down from the Premier League, we took that into a remote production environment, and very much that was probably our savior in 2020, but I'll come back to that. So really the kind of concept of that was that we were trying to step it up. We were using big data connectivity across the UK, so through our friends with NEP Connect, licensing data or leasing data out of all of our main grounds, backhauling that to Osterley, and what you would describe as a centralized model with all of the cameras coming back to Osterley, being produced in a gallery, and we were producing our match and our presentation through a single gallery in Osterley, and that was very good. You know, it was very much for us. It was we're going to try this. We're going to see how it goes, and then in a few years' time, we might start to consider moving the Premier League into this kind of environment. Cut to March 2020, the world completely implodes. Everything stops, and we'll talk about how we were producing content in the cloud a bit later. But we really hit this pivotal point when sport returned in the summer. We talked about this before, Rowan. We had this concept that we had to get through 100 matches in 40 days. And what we didn't want to do was really start to ship people all around the country to try and produce that. We didn't want to put people at risk, both potentially our customers and our staff at risk, by moving huge amounts of people around the country to cover this. So we really lifted what we'd done with the English Football League. We applied that to Premier League. So we kind of pushed EFL out of its gallery. We put Premier League into EFL's gallery. We started working our way through all of these games, and at the same time, we used every other type of remote production we could string together to try and bring all of the other games into the mix and all the other leagues into the mix. And really what that did was that kind of accelerated us 3 years really in 40 days, to the point we came out of the end of that return of sport, and our kind of seniors here at Sky said, well, look, you've proved it, let's get the Premier League remote as well. So we took then a 3-month project, come out of the end of summer, hammered it through 3 months, built another gallery for remote production, and now we've got all of the English Premier League remotely produced, all of the English Football League remotely produced, and all of F1. So yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of commitment. It's been a lot of support from the production teams, really, because we've been turning their worlds upside down, but all of that under the kind of cloud of a pandemic. It's been easier for us to get some of this stuff through, but it's been very successful. We're very pleased with it.
Yeah, certainly proving that you can do it even with the highest value content, I guess. That's
absolutely definitely. It's been amazing.
Quite a remarkable journey, pretty rapidly there, I guess. I mean, Morwen, one of the things that we looked at in the report was how different types of content might be affected by remote production. And of course, having contributors feeding into a news broadcast from all over the world is nothing new to you. But usually that's been very much anchored out of a studio, out of a central location, I guess. But you had some big changes in 2020 as well, didn't you?
Yes, I mean, we had to just tolerate anything we were trying to do. You know, when we first heard of, you know, the pandemic was coming on, we sent kit to people's homes just in case, and that really paid off. That was for radio actually, and all our Today presenters were most of them were broadcasting from home with kit we'd managed to get into people's homes just that week before, and some of our TV presenters as well. So you still anchor that through the gallery, but presenters at home, and of course all our guests. There was no guests were in the building at all. So, you know, even more people on Zoom, Skypes, whatever, FaceTimes. And I mean, there are advantages to that. You can get any guests that you want because they're available, and you get a better diversity of guests as well. So you can get some really quality people. So for news from that point of view, it helped with that. But from other things, just having no audiences in some of our programs like Question Time was a real big problem, and it wasn't until we decided to very quickly, some of our broadcast engineers who couldn't go out anymore because we weren't doing the on-site broadcast programs anymore from our OBs, decided to turn their hand to try and solve some of these problems. And they created something called Virtual Audience for us, which pulled together basically Zooms, but in quality of audiences. First of all, we tried that on radio programs, and that worked really well. It just gave that sense of there were people listening, reacting, laughing, whatever it might be, or just asking questions quite quickly back. And it's been taken on for lots of other TV programs as well. So within a couple of weeks, they invented something to get the audiences back at the heart of our programs. But the other things we were doing was, you know, news is about going out and getting the stories and bringing them back, working closely as a team. That's the key word, isn't it? Closely. You couldn't do that anymore. And so where you'd have put your report together in the back of a van in a car park and sent it back, you now have to have your people, producer, camera person, reporter, distributed at different places, and all remotely working on that edit to send that back. And that's, we, you know, perfected quite a few systems like that, where you could have people, you know, somebody in each in their own homes working, in some cases each in their own cars, sitting in the same car park working, and to bring that together. The most extreme case we had was where people came together to put a story together and then flew back to 3 different continents where they all came from, and put the piece together from 3 different continents. So we've learned a lot of things.
Yeah, and it sounds like a real mix of those different kind of production models that you've used. Some sort of distributed. Was there some cloud in there as well, or?
Yeah, you know, virtually all of the things you've gone through, Rowan, we touched on, I mean, to a greater or lesser degree. So definitely, you know, some cloud where we, you know, all shared our content together. We need to do a lot more of that, but certainly the pandemic just accelerated all the ways of working that we were toying with, you know, as Kevin said.
Yeah, and did you sort of primarily keep the main production crew in the gallery within Broadcasting House? Is that kind of the anchor that you've been able to retain throughout this?
Yes, I mean, the teams kept coming into the gallery, and, you know, hats off to them all. You know, they came in absolutely every day for every program. We automated some functions where we could, so we've got the ability to automate vision mixing on the main news programs, so we did that virtually from week 1, and actually have kept that going through. So that is a new automated function, just because it took out one of the positions, so you could have the better spacing in the gallery, and things like we put up screens in the galleries as well. But yes, we have still had the team coming in and then pulling people in from the sources. I kept, you know, as I say, sometimes they were reporters in their own homes presenting.
Yeah. And Kevin, you know, you described how you've gone to this sort of centralized model. Is that again a lot about having that production crew together in a gallery, even if it's not at the acquisition site, it's in Osterley for you? But do you still see sort of real advantage in having the crew together in one place?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the pandemic's caused us to work completely differently on this site. So we very much limited the amount of people in a gallery. So we've ended up like Osterley is just, there's pockets of technology everywhere now. All of our graphics are in a completely different building. All of our EVS replays in a different area. So we've definitely limited. You know, we've tried to follow pretty sternly the 2-meter rule. So I think we've got 8 maximum in a gallery that would have had 24. And obviously a lot of the kind of acceleration of remote production we've had has been through the pandemic. So as we start to kind of come back, and as the world starts to come back to normal, then I'm sure people will come back into the gallery. But I think there are roles that could, like graphics operations, they can work remotely really successfully. And I think as things start to level out, we'll start to understand who needs to be where. But I do think there's huge benefits in teams of people working together within a gallery. I think the advantage of being at Osterley is it's a nicer environment really than a car park up north somewhere in the rain. So there are definite benefits to it, and it's a great environment that we've created here. So.
Good stuff. Well, look, we're going to come back in a little bit, I think, to some of these questions about sort of remote individual roles and what that enables within a production crew. But I think this is a good moment for me to bring in the next 2 of our guests. So allow me to introduce Abby Hemingway, who is the Managing Director at Jackshoot, and George Patchett, who is Deputy Production Manager at ProMod Esports. Hopefully they're going to appear pretty quickly. Hello, Abby and George, welcome. So Kevin and Morwen just talking there a little bit about the sort of the production galleries and the value of having people in one space. Now, Abby, Jackshoot do a lot of different kinds of events and content, primarily online delivered, but you've spoken quite eloquently about the need for that kind of broadcast quality of equipment and environment, even in sort of online only content. Is that right?
I'm a big believer in, TV quality broadcast standards being used for any kind of content, if possible, especially the content I deliver for my clients. They expect it to stand up. Quality is absolutely fundamental. And interestingly, there's always been a mix of broadcast and new technology, over the past 20 years. The online media landscape has adopted more and more of the working practices of the TV industry, but then innovated them, primarily due to cost constraints on the internet side of producing content. So we've always had to be nimble using technology to overcome, problems on site, whether it's physical operating space or cost constraints, as I mentioned, or simply there's just too many venues to cover in one for a budget, that we would be working with. You wouldn't be able to afford 25 sat trucks. So we had to diversify technology. 2011 onwards, we started doing remote productions, if you like. So by necessity.
So to your point there about 25 sat trucks or whatever, you've done some pretty distributed productions. Can you give us an example of sort of one of the most challenging?
Well, in 2011, I'll start with that one briefly. We did London Fashion Week. We did 50 shows in 5 days from 25 locations across London, and we were using the nascent 3G technologies that were being used by news gathering and sports reports already, live view technology, and we used it in this way to create this 25 location production that we transmitted live for 5 days. And then more recently, with the pandemic creating even more requirements, I suppose, to keep people away from each other, we've had to develop those skills even more. And the global boardroom event we did for Financial Times last year was one of the most challenging, in that we were all just dealing with the fact we were in a pandemic, and then we get a call asking us to put together a production for a global online conference with some of the world's most esteemed speakers, must not fail. This is everyone going out on a limb, the first time this had really been done. And we had a month to put it together. And I think we had 150 speakers, brought in from all over the world, and having, very little production that you would call on the ground anywhere. And that was incredibly challenging, but has changed the way that conferences can now bring in speakers and reach their audiences.
Yeah, and I think some of those big global events, they're not much different from a TV show, right? They're, ultimately, it's just
even children in need is easier than some of the we do, just because of their length. There are no TV programs in the world that go live at 2:10 in the morning and go off air at 10 o'clock at night with the same production. Sure. So we're regularly doing that. So we've had to make some adjustments to the workflows to make sure everyone's comfortable and safe. And as Kevin say, you know, having a controlled, centralized hub for that is a godsend. So we can put them in a safe place and
right.
Fed and watered.
So where did you bring those contributors into? Was that into a sort of a central control room, sort of traditional TV style, or were you doing this all in the cloud, or which model were you using?
We very rapidly built some remote production galleries, probably in the similar way to Kevin. You know, when this started, we realised we weren't going on site at all for the foreseeable future, but we had all the kit that we would normally take on site. So we basically just put it all up in the warehouse and built all these different galleries so that we were ready. And then, yes, we brought in the feeds on various different platforms and various different technologies. Everyone on this panel, I think, has had a lot of testing, you know, in this process. Yeah. And yes, we brought all of the contributors in. We had all the crew producing it from their homes largely, and the operating crew, you know, in the gallery were all connected with comms, and, you know, everyone's working on a running order that's in the cloud. You know, those kinds of innovations have been absolute lifelines for us.
Excellent. And I guess a lot of those innovations come out of sort of different types of content that are produced online. You know, we've seen growing use over the last year, I would say, of some of the tools that perhaps were born out of things like game streaming. So, you know, George, coming from an esports organization, tell us a little bit about the kinds of productions that you produce and how similar or different they are to other types of TV content that people here might be used to.
Sure. So I guess at a very overarching and general level, they are pretty similar in the sense of we have acquisition by cameras and we have the processing and the control. But the devil's in the detail, right? Where instead of camera feeds for us, these are gaming machines where we screen capture the game feed from, and then it's distributed everywhere from there. So I think in terms of sort of where it's come from and where it's going, there's a bit of a blurring now between, how do I put this? With software becoming more accessible, it's certainly helped us it's allowed us to be more flexible. We're no longer tied to hardware-based studios and galleries, and it's allowed us to be able to deploy more and be on more activations, which I guess is kind of something that's a bit different about esports compared to standard broadcast is we've maybe not sank as much cash into buying OB trucks and equipment that we've had sat in studios for a long period of time, because esports hasn't had such a lengthy backing to it. We've got a fairly fresh start coming into it, I feel, especially coming into the current pandemic situation. But at the same time, with everything going software and cloud-based, going back to that line blurring, it's opened it up to be more accessible to people not necessarily involved in broadcast in a very specific way. So we're now seeing people sat in their bedrooms producing broadcasts of a similar standard that you would normally expect of standard TV broadcasts. And that's pretty scary because it's scary because it's slightly intimidating, but it's great because it pushes us forward as broadcast. And also because they've made those efficiencies, it allows us to take those on board and also use those efficiencies and then use people's time or skills elsewhere to push broadcasts further even more.
Right. And as we're seeing that convergence, it seems to me like it's sort of coming from both directions, right? So, you know, Kevin, again, you've done a lot of use of some of these perhaps traditionally more consumer or prosumer software tools in the last year or so, right?
Definitely, yeah. I didn't think at the start of the year that we'd be 3 hours a day on a vMix in sports news, and yeah, certainly at the start of the pandemic, it was a survival thing, right? Because we took the view that actually we were going to completely limit people coming on site. So Sky News went down to a skeleton staff. Sky Sports News, which was a traditional fully loaded gallery, we moved that into a bulletins automated gallery, and they've been there for a year now as well. Right. And all the other kind of shows that we were making that were, let's say, magazine based or chat shows or these kind of the sports wraparound shows, we just quickly moved them into a cloud-based vMix that we kind of put together over a weekend. It was amazing because it was kind of like we could either rerun content, right? So because obviously we're a live sports organization, and if there's no live sport going on, we come unstuck pretty quickly. So we could either rerun stuff, or we could rerun stuff and we could try and have some contribution around that to try and liven it up again. And I think probably this time last year, maybe last weekend, Easter weekend, is we went live for I think 6 hours on a vMix, rerunning the Cricket World Cup. And what that allowed us to do was actually get into all of the kind of key players' homes and have them watch it and have that kind of emotion of them watching that game when England won the Cricket World Cup. And it was like telly you couldn't normally create, right? Because can't normally get access to talent like this anyway, because they're generally playing at the weekends. But in this particular scenario, everyone was stuck at home and everyone wanted to get involved. And what it allowed us to do really was, instead of just rerunning something because it was good, it was to rerun something that was good, and we made it brilliant by kind of encouraging the audience to come back to us and to try and watch something that was new. And we were running a lot of kind of social media interaction on this at the same time, and seeing how the country, I remember it was a beautiful day. I was running vMix on my kitchen table in the cloud. I had like 3 laptops because I was convinced my laptop was going to blow up the minute I pressed go. So I was literally surrounded by tech. It looked like the Mac store. Just to kind of see that feeling of what the technology did was allow us to get to the customer really quickly, really efficiently, bring people in, and it really opened our eyes, I think. And I think the gaming and the streaming industry are kind of, they roll their eyes every time a broadcaster starts talking about this and get annoyed, because they're like, oh, we've been doing this for years and just you've rocked up with your broadcaster badge and you think you've invented it. And it's not that we haven't invented it, right? And I've had comments like this before, and it's not that we think we've invented it, but it's just we would never have used it. We've never found ourselves in a position where we would use it in a premium pay TV environment. And the pandemic opened our eyes to it, and we still use it now. So it's not just because it allowed us to work at the time. It's because it actually generally adds something that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah. No, I mean that's really, really interesting. And what you say about having your multiple laptops there sort of dives into a disaster recovery and resilience point that we won't get into. We could spend 2 hours talking about that, but obviously a key factor in delivering content remotely, right? I mean, Morwen, if Kevin was starved of content during the pandemic, you probably had more of it than you knew what to do with. So much going on that needed to be covered. But were you finding the use of some of these sort of different tools and workflows impacting what you were doing as well? Was it changing the way you operated?
Yeah, I mean, all of them, basically we would take anything we could get to make our content still and make it in a safe way, for our audiences. When the audience was actually going up, people just wanted to know so much about the pandemic and what was happening, what the new rules were, that sort of thing. So we had to go out, and so, I mean, there was just another thing that we took because the Zoom doesn't work in the right frame rate for television. We actually, a couple of our guys took something and made that work for the workflows for the camera crews. So we took things and adapted them as well. But things like vMix, when we had the US election, normally that would have been a big deployment for BBC News, and we still deployed people safely. It was a fraction of what we'd normally have done. But for our world services, like language services and the Russian service, etc., we did use vMix, which was put together in somebody's front room to do the service for them, because they couldn't all have people there. So we took a smattering of trying to do things in the traditional way, because we did that for broadcast, but for our online services, we did take the vMix. We haven't quite jumped the whole of the way as Kevin Byte for doing vMix yet for, shall we say, traditional broadcasting, but we're getting there, and we're looking at things in future. So yeah, we would take anything we could get, Rowan, to make it all work, quite frankly.
Fair enough.
Agree.
All right.
I agree with that.
I'm going to introduce my final two guests. So welcome, please. We have Bruce MacGregor, who is the lead for the BNCS product at Atos, enabling broadcast systems control over networks, obviously very important in a remote scenario. And Matthew Webster, who is a broadcast technical specialist from Ross Video. You know, to Matthew, I might start with you. I mean, people will know Ross Video for the equipment that you produce, but perhaps not so much that actually Ross Production Services is a company that offers well, production services. You know, actually a production company. So you know, to Abby's point about maintaining high quality standards, you've done some really interesting stuff with building out sort of centralized facilities using that high quality broadcast equipment, right?
Yeah, so I think we have a very interesting kind of position when we do shows, right? You know, we're owned by a manufacturer, Ross Video. We make incredible equipment, awesome stuff. And then, we take that equipment and we build production workflows and we, do events and shows for clients and we make those shows happen, right? And when the pandemic happened, in one day we lost 10 months of all of our books, just, disappeared, right? It was a crazy day. And, my first thought was, okay, well, how do we make all this really great equipment work remote? Or how do we do it in a world where we can't go to that show? And to say the least, it was a challenge. My counterpart, Logan, and I, we spent weeks trying things, making things work. And, we're at a really great spot now. But quality has been our biggest focus since the beginning of it, is what can we lose acceptably and what can we gain acceptably, and get in that happy medium,
And have expectations kind of differed through the pandemic? Have audiences been more willing to accept different types of content, lower quality content?
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting. So we do a fair amount of esport work, and with that, the audience is a lot different than your traditional audience watching something linearly. Audiences who watch like esports or non-linear content, they want a more authentic show. If something happens, something breaks, don't try and hide it. Don't try to not think it's there. Kind of roll with it, kind of try and integrate it and move on. People really like that. I personally do. I like the authenticity. Sometimes when you try to cover up things, it's kind of like fake, like, oh, but yeah.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And I'm going to bring in a question that we had from the audience, actually. So Peter Thompson from Quest Media asked, has remote production been a means to pool equipment and resources together? And I'm kind of interested, Matt, as you say, you're an organization that produces equipment, but potentially what you offer actually might mean better utilization of that equipment and presumably less of the boxes sold, right? Isn't that a tension for you?
Yeah, it's this weird, happy medium, right? Where we have a carbonite or an acuity, right? And now we can accentuate that and connect it with other systems with, whether you're doing like SRT or whatever you're doing, right? So now more clients can get access to an acuity without necessarily having to buy it, but still do a really great show remotely. Okay. Yeah, or expression or mirror, all the stuff that we have to do those things.
So that potentially actually opens up new audiences, new client bases for you, does it?
Oh yeah, I think there are a few clients that we've gotten through the pandemic that have never worked with us and are just amazed that they are able to, get X amount of equipment that they need to do the show that they want to do at the level that they would normally be doing the show, right? I think that's been their happiest part about it.
Excellent. And Bruce, BNCS is a product that controls broadcast and production equipment over networks. Just how different and more difficult is that in a distributed world, or how important is it to get this stuff right?
I mean, certainly it's a challenge. You've got with equipment distributed across the globe in some cases, and remotely controlling those from a centralized point, or indeed from multiple points, often offers challenges. There's challenges with just latency. There's challenges with keeping everything in sync as far as different changes of infrastructure and different changes of configuration. It's a constant challenge, but it's something that we are constantly being asked to do now. Increasingly, we're being asked by our customers to look at both sort of centralized and distributed models, as you've defined it within the report, as business as usual functions. I mean, most of the other guys here are talking about, you know, things that they've had to adapt their workflows and change the way they've done things with COVID. But we're looking at it very much from a, as I say, from a business as usual function. You know, this is what people want to do. They're building their architectures and looking at their business models in order to drive their technology and separate it across the globe in some cases.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that point around latency has been kind of key throughout this. George, I might ask this of you. Are there particular sort of types of production or particular aspects of the production that we see as being most vulnerable to network connections that have a greater amount of delay on them?
It's mostly, or the area that I've mostly come to see that in is in the audio department primarily, and mainly with providing fallback for members of talent that are sat in the same room. That needs to be almost instant. So shipping that audio off to cloud processing or back to a remote facility, it's very unlikely that that's going to have the low latency to allow for that to happen smoothly. So, I mean, it's something we've discussed previously, is that there's almost always a need to have an audio processing block still at the venue where the talent are, unless the talent are completely distributed, as in not sat in the same room and off-site. Then there's going to need to be some form of low latency processing on site. I would say it pertains slightly less to video. Proof in point being, you can have remote video and embed the audio on it and it still works fine. But I really think that audio in particular is really susceptible to high latency issues.
Yeah, seeing some nods from others there.
Yeah, for us, it took us, I think, 2 weeks to be like back in, you know, May, like 2-3 weeks to get really comfortable with audio, just in the timings. Video is like, but yeah, the audio is the most important.
The toughest thing is that latency is always going to be there. It's just, where do you sit it in the chain? Do you sit it at the processing hub, or do you sit it with the talent and the host? Do you sit it on site? It's not going to go away. And I think even if everything's fiber end to end, which it mostly is nowadays, it's just not going to be fast enough.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is something that we sort of touch on in the report, is that the different models really give you the trade-offs between where you want these issues to lie, right? There is always the speed of light as a limiting factor in how fast you can move data around the world, especially if you're over long distances. But then you've got to play that off against, I guess, the different operational concerns of how the team are working and so on. So, I mean, Abby, you've done a lot of different types of production. Do you tend to kind of use the same model throughout all of them, or do you actually build them in very different ways?
I wish I had a cookie cutter rig. No, we have almost an infinite combination of requirements. I must say, each event seems to have slight, constraints or otherwise, or, client and requirements, platform, perhaps specific requirements. So quality or formats that we're encoding to ultimately can actually feed back to how we're capturing it initially. So yes, we do a different technical plan for every single event, but that's fine. We like flexibility. We never like to be the people that say no. So it's, it just takes us a bit of time, test new things, get it working, and then we'll deliver it. Yeah, I was just on the point about network reliability. I said we can have all the ducks in a row and everything tested and set up. But if you're operating a remote facility and the IT department of that facility have scheduled, maintenance, even because it's an office block, they're not used to having broadcast equipment stationed there and operating remotely. We did have that a few times where the client had inadvertently not told their IT team to never let the network go down, and we lost connection to the studio as we were going live. So that was that was a sweaty couple of minutes. But those are the outside factors that you live and die by working remotely. You know, there are some downsides, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that point about different locations is something that again crops up a lot. Morwen, you must work from, you know, with all sorts of different locations at very short notice as well. You know, you don't have the luxury of only ever broadcasting from sort of well-connected stadia or whatever. You're broadcasting from wherever the news breaks. So how much change has there been in the last few years in the ability to get good quality connectivity from different locations?
I mean, yes, I was talking about this only this morning with a colleague who, you know, a couple of years ago, you would have to send a satellite truck, and then it became more the backpacks, the cellular bonded backpacks, and you know, now they're pretty good on one SIM from an iPhone if you have to, and actually, again, the pandemic made a lot of that more acceptable in a sense. I'm not saying we've accepted lower standards, but actually, Zoom type standards on air, so you can get to a lot more places, but I really think it's important to still recognize that you need a whole toolkit of things, and some days you do need that big satellite truck because you need it for a production space. You need, you know, multiple lines, you need multiple cameras. I mean, during the pandemic, we had to we were the pool facility for Captain Tom's funeral, and we pulled in, I think it was 8 cameras, worked with the family on that, and that meant it was safer on site for lots of people because we just sent one team to do it for everybody. But we did that with cameras and a big satellite truck. Lots of other things we would much prefer to use a cellular bonded backpack because it's fleet of foot, it's quicker, and you know, you don't have to worry about parking, you know, all that sort of thing. So that it's just, you know, horses for courses, but it's just so much easier now. And sometimes you can just turn up with a whole remote kit in a couple of bags, and as Abby was saying, plug into somebody's broadband in the building if they haven't turned it off, and go live with that. So it's a whole range of things we can use these days, and that's really quite exciting.
Excellent. I'm going to bring in another audience question. Sarah Carpenter at the BBC. Hi, Sarah. She says, do the panel think that the various versions of remote production will lead to more use of outsourced distribution technical production rather than the need for sort of in-house physical setups? Do you think that these remote production models will enable you to work more with sort of partners and so on, or actually are they enabling you perhaps even the opposite, to centralize more equipment in your own facilities? Anybody want to chime in on that?
I think I'll chime in. You know, we invested in some studio space and creating some, you know, remote control rooms at our facility in Connecticut in the States. And, you know, the talk that happens in our team is, well, if we're going to invest in that, I guess we don't need to invest in trucks anymore or equipment for fly packs and stuff like that. And, you know, I always kind of push back, and it's like, well, that's just kind of like another tool to do another type of show when needed, right? We're still going to build trucks. We're still going to build fly packs. We're still going to do shows that way, right? So I think it's just, you know, you're going to, you know, the sat truck, or you're going into the studio, or you're going, you know, on site. It's just another one.
Just another way of doing it.
Yeah, I'll second that and say it just depends on the type of show that's come in. We've got a handful of facilities at our hands at ProMod. We've got one based out of York that's got loads of hardware and the standard broadcasting stuff in it, which is great for shows that are based in the UK. But anything based US side or out in the rest of Europe, we can deploy cloud for that, where we wouldn't use the kit stack that's based up in York unless absolutely necessary.
I think what I'd add to that is that I think that we're certainly from Sky Sports, we're very reliant on our partners at the event. I don't think, you know, if NEP have got a massive truck and they're going to take that to one of our premier events, if that breaks down on the motorway, then they're going to send another truck. As a broadcaster, when you start to try and own every single part of it, you run the risk of leaving yourself quite exposed against that. really important rights for our customers. I think we are continuing to invest in our broadcast facility because that's where we see like huge benefits of scale and huge benefits of efficiency. But I still think we'll be heavily reliant on our partners in the industry to support the productions we're doing, purely because they're good at it, right? They're really good at it, and that, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there are these excellent, very kind of well kind of experienced partners out there that do a really good job for us. And yeah, we can take cellular bonded, and yes, we can do stuff under our own steam, but at the end of the day, we still have a responsibility to, we're a pay TV provider, we have a responsibility to get our shows on air and for them to look as brilliant as possible, and put the right technology and the right people in the right place. That's kind of my view on it.
Yep.
I should highlight off the back of that, sorry, whilst I sing the benefits of cloud, what I haven't mentioned yet is the amount of redundancy we have to put in place to back up those cloud situations in the event that they fail. So going back to what Kevin was saying about people being on the ground that do those jobs very, very well, we try and replicate that in cloud, but it costs more in terms of resources to make those redundancies happen. Sorry, Morwen, you're going to.
No, I was just going to pick up on Kevin's point, and about. I think we will still definitely try and push to do more, and I think, but it is back to the toolkit that there are times when it will be really handy to do more remote production, and for times that sustainability is becoming a much bigger thing in our industry. Really, it is key to everything we're going to be doing going forward. But also things like for me, probably for Kevin, things like accreditation. Sometimes to a key event you can only get a few accreditations, and actually sometimes you need more people there. So if you do it in the traditional way, you can't get enough accredited people to a locked event. So you would send and do it in this way, and that opens up sort of new possibilities for you. So I definitely think we are going to build on it and do a lot more of it in the future, for sure.
Yeah, that leads really
I'd agree with that.
Go on, Kevin.
I was just going to say, I would agree with that, in that, just to kind of pick up on what I was saying, it's like we are definitely bringing our people into our broadcast center, our staff people, our production into our broadcast center, but actually representation at the event is where we still are working with our traditional partners, and continue to work with our traditional partners.
Yeah, Liam Murray from RTE asked a question to you, Kevin, but I'd be interested in everybody's thoughts on this. Do you see yourselves returning to a traditional OB model after the pandemic, or actually will those centralized production, centralized gallery models kind of be the standard for you now going forward?
I think it's a mixture of things in the toolbox. I think the things that we have taken remote, so Formula One, EFL, Premier League, cricket this summer we're taking remote. There's no reason to unpick that. We're actually probably getting a better product doing it remotely than we would have been doing it on site. And what makes that successful is that we know where we're going each week, so therefore we can release massive connectivity into those venues. We can get really high quality signals back. It's massively redundant, massively secure. The whole thing works. We can contract with our OB providers to give us the kind of trucks we need to be able to support that model. I think is definitely here to stay. Now, there are events when yes, you could do it remote, but the effort that you're gonna have to go to get connectivity to that one venue for that one event, for you to do it remote, it's not going to make sense. Right. And we still find as well, even within our Premier League model, there is still like our big game of the week, we're still doing on a traditional OB truck. Yes, our replay operators are distributed or surface remote, whatever we're going to call it for this, but and really for that main reason we're doing that is that we're just after slightly more cameras, slightly more things than the connectivity really is realistically and efficiently going to hold up to. So I think there is hybrid versions of it. I mean, the majority of what we're doing is truly remote, but I think for these edge cases where you might not be able to fit enough connectivity down the pipe, you might not be able to go there enough to make it work, then yeah, there is going to be traditional models still, I think. Yeah.
Abby?
It's not binary, there are always going to be, I think Morwen said it, horses for courses. It's not going away, but it's not going to completely subvert the truck industry. So those who work on satellite trucks, don't fear, you'll always be needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that point that you make, Kevin, about the different venues and how often they're used and for what type of content is really key here, right? If it's a stadium that's going to be used every week or every month, then it's probably worth the investment in a lot of fiber, right? If it's you know, a car park in the middle of rural China, then probably not so much.
Yeah, I think we've all got very comfortable with the fact that cellular bonded works over the last year. But I think the thing we need to remember is that there was no one around also eating the bandwidth. So when we start coming to big events and we start relying on backpacks and there's 80,000 people all streaming the same thing on their phone, we do have to be a little bit mindful that maybe the consistency of cellular bonded might become a little bit more erratic until 5G settles down and we can actually get some kind of consistent connectivity there.
Yeah. George, we were talking earlier about some of these sort of cloud-based tools, and it's that point you made about redundancy and resilience is interesting. But just how far have the software tools come, and how far do they still have to go compared to a more traditional on-site hardware model?
So they've come a long way. They've come a long way since we started doing remote some time ago now. And the pandemic has just accelerated that development to an insane pace, that a ridiculous number of features have been added to software. It's working faster, it can do more. Can it do it stably? I think there's some ways to go in terms of that stability. It's great to have a bit of software that can do it all, but it's not so great if it can only do it all for 10 minutes or half an hour, you know. What I mentioned before about these streamers sat in their bedrooms with similar bits of software producing these high-grade broadcasts. That's great, and it's pushing the industry forward. But at the same time, they've not quite got the backing of redundancy because it's just software. You can't really compare software to having a piece of rack equipment that's got 2 PSUs in it, that's got dual redundant connection to the surface. One is quite clearly going to fail before the other. Even if it comes down to something as big as power, if the power goes off, one of those has got a UPS, unless you're a home streamer that spent a lot of money installing a UPS in your house. But I think it's got a long ways to go in terms of stability development, for sure.
Bruce, how are you finding this among your customers? Are you having to connect together some of these sort of cloud or software tools with more traditional workflows, or is there more of a distinction between the two?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously having to develop new interfaces every day as part of the BNCS sort of roadmap and portfolio of products. Everything from interfacing with third-party scheduling systems, third-party control systems, and other, software products going forwards.
Fair enough. Sorry, I've got a couple of pretty similar questions here, actually. So, a couple of people asking, how are the traditional broadcast manufacturers keeping up with sort of remote production requirements? How is that evolution going? Are things moving fast enough? Now, I'll be kind and give Matthew the first right of reply here, coming from one of those manufacturers. How big a transition has this been for you? And then maybe I'll ask some of your customers here whether they agree.
Yeah, so I think, I've recently, because of everything that we've been doing, I've gotten to work with the Dashboard team a lot. For people who don't know, Dashboard is Ross Video's unified control system. It's very great. But there's a feature in it that allows you to remotely control Dashboard-enabled devices over the network. It's called the proxy server. And talking with them, it used to be this thing of using it within your same facility. Oh, well, I can access everything over here, whatever. And then the pandemic happened and people are like, oh, well, I want to use proxy server over VPN and like control everything. Oh, well, we kind of got to make it work a little bit better for that, right? So adding and fixing those things and making that more robust, we're semi-easy things to do, right? Using the hardware remote, that's also kind of a challenge. You have to massage it with, VPNs, stuff like that. But I think as far as we've been concerned, we've been pretty good at getting people to remote in and working with those things pretty well. I mean, every show that we've done has been with Ross equipment, end to end, remotely.
But I can't help but think, Kevin, you were talking about using vMix. So presumably that means there was something in those software only tools that you were getting that you weren't getting from your traditional kit. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be a bit more brutal, I think. I don't think the traditional vendors have caught up. I don't think the traditional vendors have done a huge amount over the last year. Like, that's been really kind of like completely out of the box to support the efforts that people were making to just try and try and kind of survive in the pandemic. And the reason we went to vMix was we could do it under our own steam. We could do it quickly. Everyone could be involved. It didn't take proprietary technology. Everyone being involved is a really important thing, right? We've got this huge talent pool on staff here at Sky that add the things that they add to production, whatever that production is, whether it's a vMix or whether it's a massive football match, right? They add something and they're really important to our customer. And the problem with, I think, with like surface remoting or what we were, sorry, I'm using the wrong terminology, even though I've agreed to all this. Remote controlled, I've got it written down. Sorry, Rowan. The thing about doing that is that you're excluding people, right? You can't just put a MAV panel at everyone's house and say, right, everyone's a video mixer today. You can't just put an audio mixer at everyone's house and say you're an audio mixer today, right? So you're basically saying to some people you can be involved and other people you can't. And for us, that just wasn't an option. So the reason we went to vMix was because if you've got an iPhone and a laptop, we're going to crack on and we're going to make some TV, and that's all you need. And yep, we'll raid Amazon and we're going to get a ring light and we're going to get a lavalier mic that clips in, and we're going to buy all this stuff. I mean, my house just became an Amazon warehouse at one point. We were just buying everything we could to try and make it work. Laptops, iPhones, iPads, everything you could want to try and make TV, getting it to people's houses and getting everybody involved. And if you're a director, you're directing. If you're a tech, you're teching. If you're sound, you're sounding. If you're presenting, you're presenting. So for me, that was, and I'm ranting a little bit on this, but for us, it was really, really important that the right people were involved and everyone could be part of our journey, not just the chosen few that have got a bit of kit and some VPN solution into their house. Now, I think there's a few vendors, like for example, Simply Live have done a huge amount of work to get all of their kit to work remotely, and they've really stepped up and they've really kind of faced into the challenge. The reason they faced into the challenge is because they're a software-based company, right? Their whole of their platform software, so it's easy enough for them to port that into cloud or port that into virtual. It's a lot harder for the likes of Ross or Grass or Sony or any of these kind of manufacturers because they're still very FPGA-based, right? It's the hardware crate in racks. It's hard for you to just say, take this 20 years of development and throw it into the cloud. It doesn't work that quickly. But to long-winded answer to your point is that the software vendors have managed to respond very quickly. The hardware vendors haven't. Now, in Ross's favor, Ross have done some amazing stuff with us to allow us to work remotely. So they've really stepped up. But I think we've definitely got another couple of years to see the traditional vendors start to offer solutions that are a little bit more flexible.
Fully agree. There's always room for improvement.
Yeah, but
that's certainly where we rely on vMix for as well, is just that remote contribution from people that aren't necessarily set up for that sort of thing. Like particularly esports players, they have this great multi-thousand-pound gaming rig. Does it have a good microphone? Nah. Has it got a great webcam? Definitely not. But because they can just do it on their phone or, like Kevin says, on a laptop, it works well without having to ship them like a 4K camera and stuff like that.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to another one of the questions we've had from Tony Gregory, who asked, you can do a lot of distributed working from home if you've got great trained people in each of those roles, but must make it pretty tough for sort of bringing new people in for shadowing, training new operators, that kind of thing. Have any of you had those experiences of just figuring out how to make a team work and gel remotely? Abby?
I feel like we were thrown into that very early on because a lot of our events in the pandemic converted to digital events overnight from a physical event, and we had to quickly. And I was really concerned for our industry and for, all the people we employ to go to events. You know, as soon as that started to shut down, I immediately wondered how we could retrain and make sure everyone had work. So we were, it sounds like a sad story, but it's a really positive thing that came out of it. We retrained camera operators to be Zoom producers. We had, you know, producers that were able to operate remotely. And that suddenly widened the pool of people who can work for us. You know, you don't have to be within a driving distance of a site or a hotel. You don't have to spend a night away from your family to do something in Scotland. You can operate it from home. So it's actually democratized the workforce in a way, and that's not to underplay the skills involved in operating cameras remotely. You know, it's a new skill for people to learn. The basics are often the same, and the way that you work, the way that you communicate with your colleagues, that took an enormous amount of a shift. Even having this call, we've all learned over the past year to wait slightly before talking to make sure someone stopped, and you know, all of that took time. We were all, you know, talking over each other, and you know, had an ear on the radio, an ear on the program, and it becomes very difficult in your own four walls without a colleague sat next to you to go, no, just do it like this and it'll work. So that was translated into every operator's own house. You know, they all had to figure out their internet, they all had to figure out their monitoring and you know, their soundproofing from the children, the homeschooling that was happening often in the same room. So that all just had to happen, and we'll hopefully never have to go through something as dramatic as that again. But it did not make everyone innovate and to some extent compromise, but it did also open up a massive opportunity. So I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah, I think these points about the workflow and who does what and what that opens up in terms of your workforce is such an important issue. You know, I do have to sort of plug that one of the subsequent reports in this series is going to be exactly on this topic. We're calling it Working Live because there's a whole different aspect here to that. But been really interesting to hear how that's affected you already. Can I throw in one other question, which is from Tom Ragg at AIB, who's asked how difficult have this cybersecurity issues been in this remote production environment? If you're operating across open networks, that must be a pretty significant concern, right? Maybe Bruce, do you want to start us on this one?
To be honest, we don't operate across open networks. We don't do anything across the public internet, or certainly nothing that I'm aware of. Most of everything we do is within closed networks and wide area networks organised by the customer base that we have. But yes, I can imagine that it's certainly a worry, particularly for, you know, the likes of George and Abby using devices across the public internet.
Anybody had experiences at the sharp end of this? Nobody's, I hope, had any breaches of their production infrastructure.
Fortunately, not experienced any sharp edges, but I have heard word from others in the same industry saying they left hardware surfaces with ports opened up to the internet, and they came in the morning and found all of the LCDs on the front had changed to change your network configuration. It is wrong. Do not have it open. Consequently, they then changed their network ports. So, you know, it's a good thing as well as a bad thing.
Fair enough.
I think for us, is all the shows that we do is handing out TeamViewer information and being on top of everybody to change passwords, change IDs regularly. That's been our biggest thing.
Yeah, so kind of standard cybersecurity best practice.
Okay, came with Zoom, I might say. Zoom in the early days was very frightening place to be sometimes. Yes, links being sold on the dark web and what have you. So we had to be very careful when we were, you know, doing sessions with Tony Blair or Al Gore or somebody. You know, God forbid that Zoom link goes out somewhere. So we were under an enormous amount of scrutiny by our client in, you know, those cases to make sure that was as solid as we can make it.
I can well imagine you wouldn't want that to go wrong. All right, we had a question from Steve Teague at ITV saying, asking about, will anybody be sort of primarily operating in the cloud within the next sort of 5 years or so, and will that shift you to an OpEx model? Now, I'm actually going to broaden that question slightly as we're running close to the end. I'm going to just ask each of you, what do you think are going to be the dominant models that your organization will use in sort of 2 or 3 years' time? Now, we know that there is no single answer to this, but do you see yourselves heading in a particular direction? And do you see a particular type of remote production growing and other types of production shrinking? Interested how this will affect your organizations. So I'll go in the order I introduced you. Kevin, what's your view from Sky?
Oh, it's quite a broad question, isn't it? I think that we're always going to apply the right technology to the rights that we're doing. So, for example, for the next cycle of the Premier League, we will be on traditional hardware because we've invested in that hardware. It gives us the performance we need. It gives us the scale we need. What I think to answer the question to potential vendors out there, which I guess is what motivates the question, is that I think what we do see and what we will see is that there will be a shift towards software more and more. There will be a shift towards, platforms as a service, software as a service, all that good stuff. And to do that properly, I think the vendors need to really start to take on a kind of cloud native approach to what they're doing. It's all very well. We've had last year, we've had 2020, and we've taken traditional software, we've installed it in the cloud and patted ourselves on the back for installing something on Windows. I think now because that's all we've done, right? We've got like a really good data center in Ireland and really good network connectivity. We've installed it on a vanilla 2016 or 2019 Windows server. But as we start to evolve that, and we want to be truly elastic and we want to be truly efficient, then we actually do need the vendors to start thinking about true containerization. So we can choose to be in public cloud, we can choose to be in private cloud, we can choose to stretch and swell as we want to. And then I think when we start to do that, we can then really start to see how other productions can benefit, or elements of productions can start to move in software. So I do think we are on a trajectory. We will continue with software. A lot of things we do with software anyway, but we really want that software to be smart and work on modern infrastructure. But at the same time, I do think that there is still a huge place for the traditional things that we have been doing. I mean, the big question I think is, what will happen to IP? But that's starting us off down a rabbit hole. So I won't disappear down there just yet.
No worries. Morwen, what about you? What's going to look the same? What's going to look different in a news world in 2 or 3 years' time?
It's a very similar answer, really, because you've just got to use the right thing for the right job, and we've been there before. On that could be our new production vehicle that we've got that just did a big OB last week or the week before, or it could be this remote production and you stick it all in suitcases and travel. I mean, definitely more cloud-based. I mean, that is one thing I would say. And just for our production as well, our production back at base, I'm going for something for anybody that can remember the advert of Martini, anytime, any place, anywhere. That's needs to be our strategy of what we have learned is that our journalists need to be able to work anywhere as if it's W1, whether they're in Wigan or Wisconsin. It doesn't matter. It needs to be as if it's in New Broadcasting House or Salford or wherever we are. And that sort of extends a little bit to our productions on the road, that needs to go and to be able to be enabled by the cloud or whatever we have. But it's still back to it. The cloud isn't something that's going to solve all our problems. It just needs to be an enabler when it can be, because we will still absolutely need those trucks, or I wouldn't have just invested in one last year. So I think it's back to just, it can be as simple for news as a one-SIM mobile phone. If it gets me my story on air, that's what I'll take, or a multi-camera OB in top quality, and a whole range of things in between there. But in answer to the actual question, cloud will definitely form a much bigger part of our future, definitely.
Excellent. Abby, will you ever go back to having everything in one place, or do you see these distributed productions as sort of fundamental to your future?
They're fundamental, but we won't shed any of the old ways and skills that we've developed over the years. We are always customer led, so we're typically asked by brands and organizations to create TV style content, you know, and that will come with TV style workflows. So whether it's, as Morwen said, it's the flexibility of having our new vehicle has flexibility. It's sometimes, you know, transmission truck, sometimes it's a gallery. You know, we have different racks that we can put in and just, you know, deploy it as needed. So it's the tool belt. It's part of the tool belt. It's here to stay. And as networks improve and the cloud improves, we'll see more of it, but it will be more accessible, not just to bedroom streamers that George is talking about, but to brands who want to speak to their customers. They're often building their studios themselves, and they'll deploy software because it's cheaper and it can be operated by, you know, their video teams rather than a broadcast team coming in.
Yeah. And George, I mean, to that point that Abby made there, you know, I think gaming and esports does range from bedroom streamers to stadia full of, you know, crowds of tens of thousands, right? So how do you expect that sort of convergence to continue or not in terms of the way that those different types of content are made?
I mean, I think it's definitely, as kind of everyone else has said, is definitely going to keep going the way of centralized and distributed cloud workflows. I think there might be a bit of a rebound to mainly a centralized workflow, whilst cloud stabilizes a little bit more and matures a little more. That's not to say we won't stop using it. You know, as everyone else has said, it's definitely another tool in the tool belt, and has absolutely proven to be useful and usable in many situations. I think OB trucks are maybe more likely to become OB transit vans in the next decade or so. They'll still be needed, and they'll still be needed on site, but I don't think they'll be nearly to the scale that they have been in the past, where they're 26-ton Arctic trucks filled with kit. I think that kit can now be condensed a little more, maybe not necessarily with having some operators on site. So I think it is going to progress to cloud and centralized mainly. I think that's going to be a little slower than we've seen over the past year because the pandemic has forced that. Without that pandemic to do that, I think it'll maybe slow down a bit, but that's not to say it's not the future.
Fair enough. And I think that rebound towards centralized production is something that a couple of people called out in this research. Matthew, what's your view from stateside?
I mean, I agree with what everybody has said here. You know, I think we're still building trucks, we're still building equipment. We're not going to stop making any of that stuff, right? It's just making sure that it can always be used in a different way. You know, like all of our trucks, use them remotely, right? Be able to send the feeds out to a centralized facility or have operators remote in. I think that's now going to be first nature in how we design those things, not second as we might think. But yeah, I definitely think cloud more and more important. Hardware will still be here.
Yep, that makes sense. Bruce, how much of a challenge is it going to be to control all this stuff in all these different locations?
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's a challenge, you know, that we're already actively doing. We have customers using both centralized, the centralized model. We've got a customer that has all their resources located in 2 data centers in different parts of Europe, and are controlling those from control systems or control positions literally scattered across the face of Europe. But flipping that on its head, we also have a customer who is controlling everything centrally. So they've got lots of bureaus scattered around the world, and they're controlling the facilities in those bureaus individually from the centralized location in London. But as far as the move to cloud is concerned, I think it's inevitable. It's more, for me, it's more of a commercial argument. It's the move to an OPEX model is very much something that we're seeing all our customers want to do. They don't want to be sitting on depreciating assets. They don't want to be sitting on a bunch of kit, maintaining it and other things. And that's the real driver. The technology is an enabler for that, but not necessarily, and certainly should never be a blocker. But yeah, the real argument is a commercial one, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap us up. Folks, you've been fantastic. I could speak to you for quite considerably longer, very happily, but I'm sure our audience have other things to do as well. So we will call it to an end there. Thank you very much indeed to Kevin, to Morwen, to Abby, to George, to Matt, and to Bruce. You've all been really insightful and interesting. And if you want to understand a little bit more about this, then do make sure that you go and download the report. The dpp.com/LRP. We've given you a lovely short link there, or indeed, as I said at the start, just down below the video player, you can download it right now. So do check it out, have a look at those different models, and we hope that that will make it easier for you to communicate with other people about just what exactly remote production means to you. Now, if you haven't had enough of the DPP, there is plenty more coming your way. We've talked a lot about the shift to software and to cloud. There's an awful lot of innovation to be done. And next week, there is a whole week of events, DPP Innovation Week, where every day we're going to be showcasing the latest innovation, the latest products and services from DPP member companies. They're divided into different categories, so you can just go and hear very short 3-minute pitches from vendors in areas that you're interested in to find out what's new and relevant to you. But new this year, we're also having Meet the Customer sessions, where you can hear from some broadcasters and customers about their latest challenges. If you're a vendor and you might be able to help with some of them, then do turn up and hear those, because they would love to hear from you. And then we'll also have a series of CEO sessions where we've got some really senior speakers talking about broader topics around innovation in the media industry. It's a whole packed schedule over the 5 days. There's an awful lot of interesting stuff there. So do check it out, the dpp.com/IW. Again, nice short URL for you to take a look, see which sessions interest you the most, and do come along. We look forward to seeing you there. So thanks once again to our sponsors for this work. That's Atos, Ross Video, Kisway and Telstra, and to all of my speakers. Have a wonderful evening or rest of your day, and we'll see you soon at DPP Innovation Week. Bye-bye for now.